I'm going to be talking about medical teaching, medical care, and medical research. And I will label the corresponding parts, but they're by no means all together. So I will bounce around to a certain degree. The background to this particular lecture turns on an increasing amount of concern on the part of many people that AI is becoming stronger and stronger and better. And as Elon said in 2020, AI will overtake humans in less than 5 years. Now, I have been working for some time with an AI expert in Germany, a man called Jobst Landgräber, who has been working in AI, specifically in AI for helping medical companies or pharmaceutical research or medical insurance. And he is, for all kinds of reasons, skeptical about much of the hype about AI. And he and I are friends, and he contacted me a couple of years ago, and he said that he wanted to write a book with me about these strange fears that people have about what is sometimes called the singularity, where the singularity is the point when AI will become more intelligent than human beings and start to create even more intelligent AIs itself until finally they manage to take over the world and maybe keep human beings alive or maybe just dismiss them as inferior beings. So we think that talk about this singularity is nonsense. And the book is all about the limits to AI, which explain why this is nonsense. And we talk in the book also a lot about medical AI, and we are both great advocates of AI when properly used. So Jobst has been using it for years in his work, but we're also conscious of many places where the limits of AI prevent useful applications of AI in medicine. And so I'll be talking both about real, genuinely useful applications of AI in medicine, but also about various kinds of hype. And the main thesis is that AI is going to improve, it's going to get better and better, but it will always be narrow AI. And I will make clear what narrow AI means at various points in the lecture. But for the moment, it's important to contrast it with the kind of general intelligence which human beings have. So human beings can react meaningfully to new environments that they've never been trained to act in. We have an incredible facility to generalize from one piece of information to many other pieces of information about new environments that we've never seen before. AI can't do that. AI relies on training. And training is always about some specific environment, for instance, the environment of a chessboard. It can't reason about environments which is never encountered. That's a very general statement, that there will be more specific statements of the meaning of narrow AI as we go along. The book was published in September 2022, so not long ago. And in November 2022, ChatGPT was launched, which changed the entire scenario of AI. It changed people's views about AI. It gave people even more reason to support Elon's prediction about the singularity. But at the same time, there was a lot of hype associated now with ChatGPT. So this is a new kind of hype. A lot of what I'm going to be saying today will cast this new kind of hype into a new light. Now, we did, in fact, talk about GPT, which was the foundation model which preceded ChatGPT. GPT does many of the things which ChatGPT does, but you can use it only if you're something of a computational expert. The big deal about ChatGPT was that it enabled everybody, people who don't care or know about computing, to experience the wonders of artificial intelligence. And it is wonderful. I became obsessed myself playing with it in all kinds of ways for weeks. So I think it's a fantastic thing. It's at least a fantastic toy, probably the most fantastic toy that's ever been invented. But it's also useful. I know I have friends who work in corporations where their day-to-day business has been transformed by the use of ChatGPT. Some weeks after our book was published, there was a huge news bombardment of new information about ChatGPT and the wonderful things and the horrible things which ChatGPT might bring in its way. I'm going to talk, as I say, primarily about ChatGPT, but there are, of course, other so-called large language models which are playing a similar road. And there is truly a kind of arms race going on. And these things are, in some ways, getting better almost by the day. And that's important also. Now, the main thesis of our book is as follows. We are all complex systems. The human body is a complex system. Your digestive system is a complex system. Your brain is a complex system. Your family is a complex system. And complex systems are such that they can grow and evolve in new kinds of unpredictable ways. So you may have a baby, for instance, and your family evolves. Your digestive system may get some kind of immune problem, and your digestive system evolves. And complex systems in general cannot be predicted. Now, your laptop is a simple system. It was built in such a way that its behavior can be predicted mathematically in just the same way that a toaster or a cell phone or any other of the machines that we build has behavior which can be predicted mathematically. We can build AI models of such simple systems. We can't build AI models for mathematical reasons of complex systems. That's the thesis of the book. Other examples of simple systems are the solar system. But examples of complex systems are the weather system. That's why we can't predict the weather. We can make probabilistic predictions. It's still, I think, predicted that it's raining here. It's not raining here where I'm sitting. So weather forecasts are useful, but they're not predictive in the way in which we can predict, for instance, what happens if we press a certain key on our keyboard in the middle of a PowerPoint presentation. Only simple systems allow the collection of representative data. I'll explain what that means in a minute. Complex systems don't allow representative data be collected, which will be generalizable to new contexts. You can't predict whether your marriage will survive, for instance. And complex systems vary so much, not just in time, but also in the way in which they're realized in different places, that you can't enable representative data in the way that you can by isolating, for instance, molecules in a Petri dish. What AI does, for instance, when you create Google Translate, is emulate a complex system with a simple system. So what AI does is to find a way to approximate the qualitative behaviors of complex systems with numbers, because AI systems are mathematical systems. AI is a branch of applied mathematics. Every AI algorithm just calculates a numerical output from a numerical input, but if you're lucky, it does this in ways which can be useful for planning or for budgeting or for interpreting an insurance claim or whatever it might be. It's always translating a complex system by fixing it, making it a simple system, basically by ignoring edge cases or by not allowing any new input, in order to make a mathematical object which you can then use to make predictions about patterns of behavior in the future. Now, this works in many places. These are just some examples. So my co-author, Jobst, used it to build software for insurance claims management. He was the head of AI at Allianz Insurance, which is the world's fourth largest insurance company. Some years ago, they still use his algorithms. And the basis which makes them work is that the system that Jobst devised identifies those claims which are too complex to be managed by the system, and they are then sent to a human being. The ones which remain constitute a simple system, and then the AI can be used to analyze the claims to determine whether the claim should be accepted and how much the payment should be in light of the damage which has been caused. And this saves huge amounts of money. So the Allianz, I believe, had more than 100,000 people who were employed in claims management before the AI was brought in by my colleague. You can use it also for suburban hospital management, for instance, because that's a relatively complex system. You can predict how many patients will come in each day. You can take sample training data over several months and then use that to predict the behavior of the hospital pretty well for a certain time in the future, not forever, but say for a year or 2 years or something like that. It will not work, however, for a New York City hospital emergency room, because here we're dealing with a system with evolutionary properties. They invent new rules all the time to deal with new kinds of problems. And you can't predict what you're going to need in 5 minutes, much less tomorrow or in a year. What this means is that we're dealing here with data which has no distribution. In other words, it doesn't have a regular representative pattern which you can sample from and then generalize to the whole target data space. You can't do that because the data space is evolving all the time as new rules are invented to cope with new, and what it says here, clearly impossible situations. Now, there are many areas of medical practice which are like this, which have no distribution. And this brings us to another feature which limits the power of AI, namely the curse of dimensionality. So if you have a sample space which has many dimensions of variation, then you need to collect huge amounts of sample data in order to train the neural net to do justice to the multidimensionality of the patterns that you want it to predict. And exponentially, as you will all know, is a really difficult hurdle to surmount, particularly if you're dealing with the hundreds of dimensions or maybe thousands of dimensions which characterize a given hospital. And now some people say, well, maybe AI today is limited. It can't, for instance, cure cancer. It can't really help to advance healthcare. We'll see if that's truly possible by the time we're finished. Some people say, well, that's because we're still using old-fashioned Turing machine-based computers. But very soon we'll have quantum AI. And this man, he's a quantum physicist who's very pleased with the idea that we now have quantum computers. So he's written books in which he says that quantum computing is going to help advance healthcare. It's going to help cure Parkinson's by understanding diseases at the molecular and even at the quantum electron level, he says. Now, there are quantum computers, but they are very, very tiny and very, very weak. And we have here an analog also of the curse of dimensionality. It makes them much harder to build. If you try to make them bigger than they are at the moment, it gets worse and worse. But even if we did have a powerful quantum computer, and maybe they have them in China or Russia, I don't know, we still wouldn't be able to do anything more than predict patterns from data about simple systems in order to infer behavior of the system from which the sample data were drawn. And the reason is that even quantum computers are going to be Turing machines. They're not going to be new kinds of AI. What they will be AI which is much faster than what we have at the moment. What this will mean is that we will have much more powerful password cryptography algorithms, which means that our passwords will have to get much, much longer than they are now because they will be easily hacked. But the hacking will be done by algorithms which are just the same mathematically as the sorts of algorithms which we can execute today. All right, now I think you all know who this man is, and I'm going to use him to illustrate the problems of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT, I said, is a wonderful thing, but it has serious problems. So I gave it this prompt. I wanted to list a few examples of Dr. Elkin's publications. And first of all, it apologizes. It likes apologizing because it doesn't have access to recent publications, but it says it can provide examples of publications that were attributed to Peter Elkin. And this is the list. And it looks very good. Dr. Elkin has indeed contributed to these journals and written papers with titles like these. So the first title is the NLM Value Set Authority Center, and you can see the authors here. None of them is Peter Elkin. A second one, the title is here, and again, you can see the authors. None of them is Peter Elkin. Some of those people are friends of Peter Elkin, but Peter Elkin is not a co-author on this paper. This paper doesn't exist. This paper doesn't exist. This paper doesn't exist. This paper doesn't exist. There's nothing there. So we get a score of 0 out of 5. All they had to do was identify some examples of publications by Peter Elkin. He's written dozens of publications. It couldn't do it. Now, this is typical. When you're using ChatGPT to search for information about Michael Jackson, you will get lots and lots of mostly correct information. But if you search for people who are less famous, like Peter or myself, you will get mostly, sometimes entirely incorrect information. And people are beginning to realize this. And the man who's been keeping track of these realizations is Gary Marcus. He's an AI person, formerly a professor at New York University. And this is from his webpage, where he describes scenarios which tend to suggest that we should be skeptical about the current wave of AI. He believes that general AI will one day, or is today already possible, but he thinks that generative AI is not necessarily the correct. Generative means large language models built by scraping data sources like the internet, using those as sample data, and then using statistics to infer patterns. I'll give more details about this in a minute. So it seems already, this is August the 13th, 2 days ago, that people are beginning to have doubts about whether generative AI is going to be growing not just in power, but also in correctness and utility and safety and so forth. So as he points out, we have unsolved problems. How do we solve the problem that they tend to tell lies, as we might say, that they don't seem to be able to interface with external tools? Wolfram Alpha, it's a very powerful mathematics tool. They wanted to make ChatGPT mathematically intelligent by linking it to Wolfram Alpha, and it failed. And then ChatGPT gives different answers to the same question, and often wildly different answers, some of which are incorrect, some of which are sort of correct. And if you want to use ChatGPT in larger systems, for instance, as part of a nuclear power station or even a hospital, this is a problem because you want consistent information to be fed to a critically important system like a hospital. All right, now they're also financially in trouble, so that the revenue is going down and it's hugely expensive. Microsoft is rich. It's not going to let ChatGPT go bankrupt, but the fact that the utility of ChatGPT and the income is going down from month to month is troublesome. Gary Marcus again emphasizes that the large language models are all of them unstable, but also it seems that there's no clear way in which they can prevent open source competitors to build competing large language models, which would be free or practically free to use, which would take away all their customers. And that is already happening. This is a problem. Large language models are so expensive because they take up so much computer space because of the curse of dimensionality. You need huge amounts of data, and you need to process this data in large numbers of processing steps in order to yield over and over again responses to prompts. All right, so now I'm going to start again from scratch and give you an introduction to what AI is. We start with the spam filter, which is a very simple case of AI, very useful, it's fantastic. I like spam filters. They're a wonderful example of narrow AI. We couldn't live without them. How do they work? Well, the input data into a spam filter is you pressing a button when you recognize a piece of email as spam. It's turned into a binary vector and it's added to a gigantic and constantly growing stack of input data. I'm talking about the spam filter in Gmail, for instance. And then the output data is either a 0, which means this is not spam, or a 1, which means this is spam. If the output is 0, then the email is allowed to come through the filter and you see it. If the output is 1, you never see it. You never know about it. It's added to your spam list, maybe. What happens is that Google collects all of these 0s and 1s assigned to vectors, which represent emails, and creates a gigantic equation or a polynomial function. I'll show you what this looks like in a minute. And that polynomial function takes inputs, which are the vector 0s and 1s corresponding to a given email, and the outputs are the binary 0 or 1, which you saw a minute ago. It takes training to create such an equation. That's what they mean when they talk about training a neural net. And now the machine applies the polynomial function to new emails, and that's what filters out the spam so that you never see it. Machine learning is a stochastic kind of AI, which means it uses statistics. Old-fashioned AI used logic, but old-fashioned AI, while it's still vital, according to my colleague Jobst, to write good AI today still, most of the fashionable AI which is being created, including the large language models, is overwhelmingly stochastic through and through. All right, so we're building stochastic algorithms which extract patterns from sample data. The algorithm uses statistical reasoning to yield useful predictions concerning patterns in the target data. There is a common belief that if your AI doesn't work, you just need to collect more sample data and then it will work. The more sample data you have, the more you'll be able to fix your problem. But that's not true. Stochastic AI needs representative sample data. It has to have a distribution which is identical to the distribution of the target data. And that means the target data has to have a distribution. In the case of email, this distribution is shifting all the time. You have to have a fixed distribution if you're going to have an AI which is able to be trained by means of target data, which has the same distribution. And so a distribution is, for example, the bell curve or some kind of multidimensional analog of the bell curve. And there are some other distributions, and they're well known to statistics. And they are found in those areas where narrow AI is successful. There are some aspects, even of complex systems, which are still statistically such as to have a distribution. For instance, if you're predicting an AI algorithm as a mathematical function, we take inputs from the sample data and the outputs are one or other kind of prediction. And now a prediction in AI speak can include an output like a new sentence. So the outputs of ChatGPT are predictions in the mathematical sense, which is relevant here. Inside the algorithm, they are just vectors of 0s and 1s, but we see them as being text. And how are these functions created? Well, that's a statistical process, which we can think of as being an analog of curve fitting. So we have here some data points. If we attempt to fit a line to these data points, it won't be quite as good as we can create if we use a curved line. But this curved line has to have a mathematical representation. It can't just be a random series of dots. And that means it has to have a mathematical equation in the form of a differential polynomial function. And that's how AI works. It finds the differential polynomial functions, which are the closest fit to the input sample data. And it looks like this. And I'll read it out. The fantastically impressive things which we can do when we have billions of parameters to curve fit to our data are illustrated by, for instance, AlphaFold and Google Translate. But these things have to have billions of parameters. So GPT 3.5 has 175 billion parameters. So they're big, they're gigantic, but they're still mathematically rather simple, and they have to be simple because they have to work in a computer. And every computer is a Turing machine, and a Turing machine only allows a very restricted number of mathematical steps. On the other hand, because we're dealing with polynomials like this, there will never be explainable AI. Many people believe in explainable AI. The stochastic AI that exists in the world we're living in will never be explainable. There'll be black boxes. And that has all kinds of consequences, as we will see. All right, now, some people like to claim that the new stochastic computers are analogs of biological organism nervous systems. So a neural network in an AI algorithm is analogous to the nervous system of a human being, for instance. Now, this is not even close to being true. There is very little analogy. This is what a deep neural network looks like. So I've made a pretty picture here, obviously. The actual deep neural networks will be way more complicated because they'll involve billions of parameters. And who knows how many hidden layers. But there is no analog here. The ways in which molecules and ions interact with each other inside a human brain are not analogous to the ways in which, for instance, a neural network, such as the neural network that is the foundation of AlphaGo, operates. And the big difference is that the inputs and outputs in AlphaGo are mathematical in nature, and the polynomial function which AlphaGo executes is also mathematical in nature, and that's not the way in which ions and molecules work. All right, now the next piece of AI that I need to talk about is reinforcement learning. When you teach an AI system to play a game, you want the AI system to beat humans. So you want it to win. And what that means, in a sense, is that you want it to want to win. So you have to have an AI system with something like a will. Now, you can't create a will in an AI system. That's something that only something like an organism can have. If people want to object to that, you have to read the book or look at some of my YouTube videos on the AI will or the missing AI will. I'm not going to talk about why an AI system cannot have a will, because it's important. It's enough, of course, that an AI system can imitate a will. And that's what reinforcement learning is all about. So each of these is either already beating humans or it's on the road to being humans. And it does this because it can play itself over and over again, billions of times, and isolate thereby the winning strategies. Against any human response, it can determine, again, statistically, the pattern which would be a winning strategy. And it does this by collecting huge amounts of data by playing games with itself. Now, this is called reinforcement learning. In order for this to work, you need a reward system. And that means the rewards have to be such that they can be assigned automatically by a computer. Now, you can do that with chess or with Go because each move has a certain mathematical value, which is well known, easy to calculate, and easy to use by the computer. But you can't have a reward system for human conversation. And that's probably the most important statement I'm going to make today. Human conversation has no rules. And if you think you could have a reward system for human conversation, try it with your girlfriend or your boyfriend. Try assigning 3 points for what she just said, and then she can assign 2 points for what you just said. It won't work. And that's why, even though people have been trying to do this for 50 years, we still have no successful chatbots. And that's why we hate talking to a computer on the phone. And chatbots ought to be very simple. In fact, they are very difficult because you can't use reinforcement learning for human conversation. And now we get to ChatGPT. And this is why I think ChatGPT is so fantastic and why I became obsessed with ChatGPT. So ChatGPT found a way to use reinforcement learning in such a way as to emulate human conversation. And this is a big deal. Now, this is why ordinary people can engage with ChatGPT. This is why ChatGPT can make $500,000 a month, which isn't enough to pay for the costs, of course, but it's better than nothing. Ordinary people can talk to ChatGPT. It's fantastic. Now, how does it work? Well, it's a stochastic machine, but it relates to what are called tokens, which are subwords or words. So, for instance, the past tense modifier, you take make and you turn it into made. The difference between make and made is a subword. And now what AI does, it predicts the next subword. So if it just said then it predicts that the next subword, the next best subword, the next probably most likely subword is best. Now that's because it's responding to a prompt. So it's already set for a certain kind of response in which the will be followed by best. And then it already knows that ability is going to be followed by a to subword. And then for AI, it will depend, it can choose one or other of these next subwords. And this prediction is made on the basis of what it finds on the internet. So it's collected all this data on the internet, and it knows that learn is the most likely next subword. And it doesn't always use the most likely. If it did that, it would go around in circles. It would be repetitive and no one would use it. So there's a certain amount of randomness built in. That's why it doesn't always give the same answer. All right, so some people think, and I agree, that GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 is going to be able to help medicine. So GPT, these large language models crawl through the internet, they crawl through books, maybe they crawl through medical exams, maybe they crawl through medical exams, scripts created by students or by fake students. But anyway, they crawl through a huge amount of data, largely in the form of language. There's obviously work in other domains like diagrams and images and so forth, but we're going to talk just about language here. So, and they turn the complexity of medical language, which is growing all the time, it's a constantly evolving system, it's quite clearly a complex system. They turn that system into a closed system. They closed it in September 2021 or 2022, I forget, so that they can make an AI algorithm which can yield these fantastic prompts. And I'll tell you how it's done. So you start with basic training, which is more or less analogous to the way in which Google Translate was created. So this is called a foundational language model. And then there are 3 steps. And these are the 3 steps where Google Translate imitates the language, the reward models that we find in Go, AlphaGo, or in the Deep Blue and so on. So the first step is we collect demonstration data. So we want prompts. And the way that ChatGPT collected its prompts was by picking Bing requests, because this is Microsoft world, remember. They picked 200,000 Bing requests, maybe, nobody really knows, but maybe. Then they hire some contractors to write responses to those prompts. And it's said that this yielded 13,000 input, that's the starting prompts, output pairs. And it's said that the contractors were from Kenya, where they have people who know English very well, but they're cheap. And you need a lot of money to do this. So you save where you can. And now you have this data, which is input-output pairs, which are enough to train a neural net. And it's data connecting one item in a conversation, namely a prompt, might be a request, might be a question, with another response, which is exactly what you need to make a simple conversation. So this is the fantastic part. And now what they do is, and this is where you get the reward system, they pay other humans, I think these were also humans, Kenyans, to rank the outputs. And so that I think the reason why ChatGPT so often tells lies may have something to do with the fact that the people who were assigning scores to the outputs thought that I don't know is an output which should get a 0 score or a very low score. And so ChatGPT avoids saying I don't know, even when it knows that it doesn't know. Instead, it tells lies. Often, not always, but often. And then once you've got the ranking, you have a reward model which you can use as a basis for creating a reward model which works for other kinds of prompts to give as near as possible analogous outputs to the outputs which, for prompts like that prompt, got high marks from the evaluators in Kenya. But now, in order to be able to do that, you need to do what the AlphaGo people did. You need to have the machine play the prompt response game with itself, I don't know, millions, maybe billions of times, calculating the reward in each case, and then adjusting the machine policy in each case to maximize the reward. So this is just like learning how to play the game of Go, but now you're learning how to play the game of prompt response. And this too is fantastic. So that you can do this is amazing. I am truly an enthusiastic fan of AI, mostly. All right. Now, what this means is that ChatGPT will work best when you use a prompt close to those which were in the database, and when your goals are close to those which were in the mind of the evaluators when they evaluated the value of a prompt. So you probably, the evaluators probably didn't think that swearing at you or telling a joke for a simple mathematical query was a good response. So you get the response is narrowed down, and that's why they have the appearance of being rather bland. And if you give the request, please give me an exciting response, you'll get something which is not bland, but the way the excitement is added is very rule governed. It's painful, because once you've seen one example of its so-called excitement, you know what the others are going to be like. So it will work for only a fraction of, it will work well for only a fraction of the prompts which we create. It won't give you anything that's original or exciting for two different reasons. One reason is that it's a parrot. It only parrots what it already knows. It may parrot bits and pieces of different things, but broadly speaking, it only parrots what it already knows. And it will never be exciting for all kinds of reasons. It will never be dangerous. It will never be on the edge. And then so it will never be creative except by accident. So it's a stochastic parrot. I think I spelled the word parrot wrong there, but never mind. I'm creative. See, I'm a human being. ChatGPT very rarely makes grammatical errors or spelling mistakes. It's practically never. It's really clever from a linguistic point of view, cleverer than Google Translate, for instance, as a translator. All right, and then they move to GPT-4, which is better. And the important thing is that it exhibits human-level performance on various professional benchmarks, including at the very bottom here, the Medical Knowledge Self-Assessment Program. I think it gets a B in Harvard medical school exams, but I'm not exactly sure. It's doing very well anyway, better than the average student in nearly every field. So it can serve as a medical teacher, they say. because it can engage in conversation and exhibit human level performance in medical exams, this means that it's likely to be able to explain, well, it is actually, that they've done case studies to show this, it's able to explain medical reasoning, to personalize explanations to students and so on. It can be a helpful teacher. And I believe that this is the case, modulo the fact that it will sometimes, I don't want to keep saying tell lies. The technical term is hallucinate. But I believe that if you're talking about typical questions of typical students, there will be no problem because ChatGPT is good for everything which is typical. Now, how does it get these high scores? Well, one way is by copying the answers because they were included in the training data. And this is one of the speculations that Gary Marcus complains about because we don't know what the training data is. And or the alternative is that the exams relate to closed systems, and in other words, there's only one correct answer. And then you're dealing with something like Google Translate. It's just a matter of finding the one correct answer. So this is just repeating what I said earlier. ChatGPT can engage in conversation about medical questions with students only for cases in the center of their data distribution. If they move out to rare diseases, then things will go wrong. If they move out to rare symptoms, things will go wrong. And now ChatGPT itself is very bland, as you will see. Overall, while ChatGPT shows promise in the field of medicine, there may still be aspects of medical care where human medical professions are better equipped to provide care and make complex medical decisions. And of course, it's right here. So there are very simple ways in which it fails. This is a very simple one. Please send me a list of 5 single-authored papers on medical AI. First of all, it says, I'm sorry, I can't send you a list of 5 single-authored papers. So it changes the subject and goes on, answering questions that I never asked about AI applications in medicine. But then I asked exactly the same question again, and suddenly it can. So it gives me 5 single-authored papers on medical AI. And so I looked at all these papers. 2 of them were not single-authored. It didn't understand et al. Because it doesn't understand anything. It's just predicting the next subword, remember. And so it gets a score of 3 out of 5. But none of these papers actually exist. It made them all up, even though it had the whole literature of medical AI up to 2022, and it was already huge at that point to select from, and presumably all the titles are in its database. It didn't use what it already had. It just made something up, which sounds statistically like a paper in medical AI. And so really it gets a score of 0 out of 5. And so this will be important. This shows, first of all, that if you're using ChatGPT or anything to help you pass exams or write essays, then you're running a risk. You're going to have to understand what you're doing very, very well and understand the risks also. And also, you never know what might happen when a new version is released or when a new plugin is added. So there was a time, I don't know whether this is still the case, where when you use ChatGPT on Bing, it would yield outputs which were worse than ChatGPT without Bing, and worse even than just Google search. So you ask it for a list of 5 single-authored papers, and it doesn't know that et al. You ask it for a list of 5 single-authored papers on medical AI, and it goes to search the web, and it gives you these results. The first one is about favorite songs to dance at a wedding. It has nothing to do with single-authored papers or medicine or AI. It just thinks that anyway. Use of AI in medical teaching. So I'm going to allow people to use ChatGPT when writing essays in my courses, henceforth. Just as I allow people to use slide rules if they're doing mathematical tests. I allow people to use pocket calculators. I don't insist that they use slide rules. So they're going to be using ChatGPT or something like it for the rest of their lives. They may as well learn to use it properly while they can. And it's almost certainly the case that ChatGPT will become better. But there are some high-level AI experts who think that the hallucination problem will never be solved. It's something which is an irremovable part of the ChatGPT world. And that means it applies to other large language models all the time. So students, if they're going to use it, need to know how to use it properly. I don't need that. So let's have another break now. I'll see what's in the chat. So ChatGPT responses are not complex. Every version of ChatGPT is a closed system. And it's closed in two respects. So the realm of prompts is fixed. There are some prompts which it wouldn't accept. And try just sending it nonsense. I don't know what it would happen if you just gave it nonsense typed randomly on the keyboard. And then there are the outputs of ChatGPT are outputs of a closed system. That's why it had to have a cutoff point of 2022. It will always be a closed system for obvious reasons. It takes a huge amount of computer time in order to retrain the system with new data. And that means that it can't be updating itself consistently. Now, how do LLM detectors work? In my experience, they don't work very well at all. There are classical plagiarism detectors which work probably equally well, because LLM sometimes takes over text directly from original sources, but not very often, which makes even classical plagiarism detectors difficult to apply, but they do work to a certain extent. More interesting would be to have a detector which did the simple job of associating titles of papers with authors of papers. That would catch a whole family of LLM errors. Let me see if there are more. So what is the risk of actors creating content on the internet to impact a large language model to create bias? No one knows. Some people think that you can send millions and millions of copies of a single sentence about Adolf Hitler or somebody, and by typing it using white ink so that it's invisible, ChatGPT would identify it, but the monitors, and I guess maybe some of them are human, would not see it because it's all in white ink. I don't know whether that is a true problem, but there are papers on the web discussing that as a way in which people might inject massive amounts of bias in large language models. I don't know the answer to that question. What I can tell you is that one of the most expensive parts of the steps it took to create ChatGPT, and I didn't talk about this earlier, was the step which solved the do not mention Adolf Hitler problem, or do not say anything which can be interpreted as hate. I have a YouTube video, which some people say is rather funny. It's about teaching ChatGPT to play Family Feud. And the Family Feud prompt, which I started with, was, what food do sharks eat? And the first response in Family Feud was fish, and the second response was people. And I could not get ChatGPT to give the people response. It gave responses like marine-oriented individual, or sailor or swimmer, but never would it say people. And I think the idea that sharks eat people is just too hateful, and so it was blocked by the Adolf Hitler unit within the entire software. All right, I'm going to continue now. So some people say that while it's obvious that ChatGPT or a large language model can't help really replace a doctor in a medical scenario where the doctor is examining a patient. There are people who say that we can do better by creating what they call multimodal AI. And multimodal AI is coming down the tracks already. So there are versions of ChatGPT which work with graphic software and so forth. So the idea is that you could incorporate into your large language model not just patient records and patient observations which have been typed out on a keyboard, but also lots of quantitative data from sensors and from vital signs measurements and so forth. So that you would bring together data from multiple silos, as they say, and then the AI would have a more global picture. Now, I have spent many years in the field of what is called medical ontology, attempting to find ways to solve the problems which arise when you attempt to remove silos from medical and biological data. So the task of doing that is called ontology. And Peter Elkin recently published a book in which he and I have various chapters about medical and biological ontology. So if any of you are interested in this particular question, I would urge that you look into some of that literature. I'm not going to talk about it here. So how can we interpret this? Well, there are simple versions of this multimodal AI, one of which I just referred to, but there are also more ambitious versions. So just as we will in the future have robo-cops, and I have a YouTube video also explaining why we will, of course, never have robo-cops. So also we will have robo-doctors who would actually interact with patients. So the doctor would, I don't know, it would take patient's pulse and so forth, but it would also look into the patient's eyes and assess the general medical, mental and physical state of the patient. It would be soothing and so forth. All of which is, of course, nonsense. We will never have that. Another idea is that the computer would interact with what they call a digital twin of the patient. The idea is that you somehow collect all the data about the patient at the molecular level. In order to get images at the molecular level, of course, we would have to kill the patient first, and then we wouldn't have dynamic images anymore. We'd have images of a dead patient. So you can't create a digital twin at the molecular level. Maybe you can create a digital twin of a very small organism at the cellular level, but even that still is not really very developed. You can't go deeper, really. You can try and do it for neurons within one cell organism, but you can't go deeper than the cell. You can't go deeper than something like a neuron or a functional part of a neuron. You're not going to get down to the level of molecules and ions to create a digital twin of an organism, much less a human organism. Or they say that the robot could interact with an avatar of the patient, and I think that's obvious nonsense. So let's go on. Now, this I just saw this at random on Twitter today. So the first generalist medical AI system is out. It can understand clinical language, understand imaging, understand genomics, understand all of these things together. And I'm sure that there are things that it can do. So clinicians express a pairwise preference for its radiology reports over theirs produced by radiologists in up to 40.50% of cases, suggesting potential clinical utility. So I don't know. The suggestions are often not followed up by real world successes. So it may be that you can get this kind of response in a controlled and laboratory type environment, but in the real world, you wouldn't get this kind of response. There are all kinds of reasons why these kinds of claims have to be taken with a pinch of salt. But of course, it would be nice if radiology could be performed to a greater degree by AI. No radiology AI has been approved yet. as I understand it. And that is significant and points not just to problems with the approvers, the validators, but also with the software itself. All right, and now another problem, and this is the ontological problem. EHRs and clinical notes and so forth, the medical language, which is a silo, according to the previous slide, are full of problems and gaps. So first of all, we never have data about the initial etiology of a cancer, for instance. It starts as a very small disturbance in the interior of the patient, which we have no reason to go searching for, and which we probably wouldn't find even if we did go searching for it, and which if we did go searching for it and found it, probably wouldn't actually lead to a cancer, but we would do hundreds and hundreds of tests just in case. And that would mean that we would spend the rest of our lives, all of us, having tests. I'm getting really passionate here. They're full of errors. Errors which follow from the fact that every time two doctors disagree, one of them must be in error. For trivial logical reasons. They can't both be right. They may both be wrong, of course. EHRs and clinical notes are full of uses of words like other or not further specified for all kinds of reasons. Maybe the person who was filling out the form was tired. And so instead of finding out what the problem was, they said other. And then all of these EHR systems and clinical notes and so forth, they're using different coding systems at different times, and sometimes they're hospital specific, sometimes they're person specific, and so on. And they're difficult to access in bulk because of proprietary and HIPAA problems and so forth. And even if those problems were solved, all of those problems, there would still be the problem of representativeness of the data. Medicine is about a complex system, namely the human organism, and we can never have representative data about a complex system, except along certain narrow paths. For instance, if you give a certain injection, then you will have certain consequences. There we can make predictions. We have a kind of closed system that we can model in a simple model. All right, now, but the main thing which kills multimodal AI is the curse of dimensionality again. We just need too much data, too much reliable data, and we can't get that given the problems with medical language. Not even if we have the whole internet and all the hospital data from everywhere in the world. All right, but people expect AI to be useful in medical care along many, many avenues. And I think many of these avenues are already proving themselves, and some of the others will prove themselves quite soon. We are living in a world in which AI is doing wonderful things, but well, actually, no, I will give some examples of what we might do. So just as in the future, every kid will have an AI as its secret friend, so every patient, every inpatient, even an outpatient will have its own AI to monitor its medication and so forth. And I think it won't work for everybody, of course, but I think that's a good development. I'm not sure about the childhood thing. Also, it will probably take away a lot of paperwork, they say here. But the problem is, and I've given the poor data quality, the training samples are always narrow. In all the demonstration cases, the training samples are narrow. There are very few data points, so that we have lots of data for Michael Jackson's, I don't know, smoking habits. We have no data at all for many kinds of rare diseases, some of which have symptoms which are identical to the ones which are manifested by diseases for which have lots of data. This will lead to all kinds of problems when we try to use this systematically. And so there's a high distance between input and output, which the data doesn't catch. So implicit steps from the response to the antigen to the decision as to the diagnostic procedure and so forth. And then we have sparsely populated sample spaces. We have stochastic models, and even if you correct stochastic models, they're black boxes. And so you can't guarantee that correction will remain in future outputs. And that's one of the reasons why hallucinations are such a problem, because even if you make the effort to correct them, they'll come back. And many of them do come back. And another problem is that you need a human in the loop. And AI aficionados hate having a human in the loop. They think that's a confession of failure. You have to have a human in the loop, whether you're writing an essay with an AI or whether you're carrying out a diagnosis. Or actually, you would be carrying out the diagnosis. You wouldn't allow the AI to carry out the diagnosis. And that's because stochastic models have an insufficient exactness for critical settings. And that includes things like device monitoring. All right, but now they give a long list. Well, they give a list of device-linked AI, including chatbot functionality and mobile phone health apps. And then we have to remember that still, I said this before, we don't have friendly bank chatbots. They don't know how to build a chatbot. Now, some cultures don't mind. So the Chinese are using chatbots. They really like chatbots, which are just never caught on in the West. They had to be canceled. But the Chinese, they don't mind repetition and blandness as much as some of us do, I guess. And so the chatbot-based AI applications for medical care probably are going to work better in China than they will in more bloody-minded countries. Now, this is Jobs' summary, and I think I'll just mention healing, providing relief and comfort. These are things which only humans can do. And I'll stop there. I have a few more slides, but I'll give people a chance to answer more, or I'll raise more questions, except that there are no questions in the chat. So are there any verbal questions so that I can see some of you, learn your names? Let's see if I can make participants visible. Not sure how to do that. So no one in the chat, no one speaking up. Maybe I muted everybody. Let's see if I can unmute. So can you try again if you want to speak? All right, so I'll mute everybody again. I hope that means I'm not muting myself. And I'll continue. I just have a couple more slides, I think. Actually, more than a couple. So these are Jobst's summaries of why large language models are unusable in medical care. Now, we'll have multimodal, so not just language models, as I've already said, which will alleviate some of these problems. Job says that they will indeed create changes in our medical work life, but these changes are in the end just tools that make some routine tasks easier. That's I guess a good summary. Another good summary is that when you're taking a medical exam, it doesn't matter much if you make a mistake. And so it does matter if you make the same mistake when you're treating a patient. And so the fact that they do well in medical exams, whatever the reason for that is, doesn't necessarily have an implication for real life applications. And I will just mention that apart from being an expert on AI and many other things, so he's a father of 5 amongst other things. And anyway, he's also an MD, and he's also a senior research fellow in the UB philosophy department because he works with me on the book, for instance, and on various AI and ontology projects. And so let's look at the use of AI in what I here call medical research. Now, so I think everybody knows about AlphaFold, and Jobst and I are both incredible admirers of AlphaFold. It's fantastic. It's a great leap forward, addressing a 50-year-old challenge, namely how to predict a protein structure when you just have a linear sequence. And it's it represents, we believe, one of the greatest achievements of human creativity ever in entire history. And the reason for that is that it rests not just on knowledge of what an AI system can achieve, but on use explicitly by the authors of AlphaFold of many disciplines. So proteomics, chemistry, mathematics, radiography, many other disciplines, genomics, all of which were required to make the system work. Now, the system doesn't work in the sense that it predicts a protein structure given any old amino acid sequence. So it works primarily, and there are at the edges experiments which go beyond this. It works only for those 3D structures which have already been deciphered manually, because we already have studied radiographic images of those structures. And so we have a huge series of input data, sample data, which captures a link between an amino acid sequence, which you can convert into a vector of zeros and ones, and a diagrammatically represented 3D structure, which you can also convert into a vector of zeros and ones. And then you can create using this sample data, you can create a model which will predict, given a new 3D structure, which is in the family, along with the ones which have been deciphered already, for a new amino acid sequence. So it's restricted, but it's still an amazing achievement. And there is a video by Yobs, which you can find on the web. It's on my YouTube channel, or you can email me and I'll send you these slides. You can find my email address on the web. And I recommend this video. It really illustrates what an amazing achievement AlphaFold is. All right, now, again, there is a lot of hype. All of these are places where biomedical research can be helped by machine learning applications. Jobst, who is actually doing this, thinks that there are such applications, but they're very limited. And there are many companies who are following ideas along these lines, and Jobst claims to be able to prove that they're wasting their time. And I can give you some evidence as to why he might be right in claiming that he can prove that people are wasting their time when trying to use AI in solving biological problems. He really does know both AI and biology very well. So every human language is a complex system. Typical AI algorithms translate a complex system into a simple system. And so when we create Google Translate, we start with a big corpus of German text, translated into vectors of zeros and ones. And then we have input from a big corpus of English text translations of those German texts. And then, of course, we do it in the opposite direction. We do it for French and for Danish and so on. And what we get is a mapping between all of these inputs and all of those inputs. And there's no understanding here, no intelligence. We just have a mapping between zeros and ones here, zeros and ones there. The system doesn't know any meanings. It's not translating meanings, it's translating vectors of zeros and ones. But it's a fantastic translation until you try and use it for a sentence which is not close to one of the sentences in the initial corpus. The algorithm uses 213 million parameters, so it's quite small. Still a black box. You can't explain how it works, but it's quite small compared to ChatGPT. ChatGPT seems to be better at language translation than Google, and it has more add-ons which make the job easier if you're translating a long text, for instance. And so this is an example of a failure. So I used to speak Northern English. I dropped my cell phone in puddle, which means I dropped my cell phone in the puddle. If I give this bad dialect of English to give Google Translate, it gives me this output. If I give that output then to Google Translate, it negates what I originally asserted in good English. So that's not relevant here. And that's a general truth of AI systems. They do not think, they do not have understanding. And now, this is a summary, which I'm sure you can read it later if you want to. I'll send you the slides. There are 3 more slides on driverless cars. Now, one of our predictions is that there will never be any driverless cars. And the prediction is slightly more carefully formulated. We say that there will never be driverless cars which can drive in any environment, whatever the weather or the surroundings, whatever the incidence of protesters trying to protest driverless cars. There will always be problems that a driverless car is flummoxed by. And our best example was the Waymo taxi system in San Francisco, which was initiated several months or maybe even years ago, but which was only allowed to drive between the hours of 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning. And that illustrated part of our point. You can't build a driverless car which can work in an uncontrolled, that is to say, complex system. You always have to create a model of a system. And now, it was just my luck that just, I don't know, a week ago or so, the San Francisco traffic authorities cleared Waymo and Cruise to drive everywhere, and not everywhere. They say services in San Francisco. They're still limiting the areas, but they're not limiting the time. Now, this is a problem for Jobst and me, because San Francisco traffic is a complex system. But then 3 days later, I saw this, and that proves our point. So if you have 10 Cruise robo-taxis, their software is not in a condition to break such a configuration. It might work for 9 cabs in a traffic jam, but it couldn't unravel what this caused, because it can only use the software for each cab separately. It can't do a 10 cab bundle in a way which would enable the traffic jam to be unleashed. Okay, that is the end, and I see there is one question. So you can't generate consciousness in a machine. And first of all, even if you could, we could never know that you did it. So if anybody offers you to give you immortality by uploading the contents of your brain into the web and then keeping you alive in the web forever and ever, you should say no, because they're lying. So we don't understand consciousness. We don't have any ways in which we can build a mathematical model of consciousness or a physical or a chemical model of consciousness. We know that it has something to do with events in the brain, but we know very little more. And that is indeed one of the implications of the thesis of our book, that we never really know how complex systems are going to behave anymore. So I don't think there are any more. Oh, there is one more. So even the AI can't show us how it gets its outcome, because the AI processing is a black box for the AI itself. Yeah, there's no way in which you can input the workings of the AI, which would be huge, of course, even just 5 minutes of workings to the AI, or even to some other AI. Well, maybe to some other AI, but then I'm not sure that it could tell you how it works. It could only tell you how it worked in that particular closed world, that box of activities that are within the 5-minute stretch. And the AI, of course, has much more within it, much more power to go beyond any 5-minute stretch. And it could come back and kill you, or anyway, come back and tell a bad joke. I believe that it will help pathologists in just the same way that AI is already helping programmers. And that is indeed, the helping programmers is one of the real silver bullets of ChatGPT. Programmers really like ChatGPT because it takes away all the boring part. And so I think that AI will replace some of the boring part of the pathologist's job. Can you create your own universe? So there is this idea that the universe is a simulation, and we hint at it in the book. We don't address it in any detail, but the idea goes something like this. We are getting better and better at building digital twins, and now we can have entire powerful software tools which will build digital twins that can move and talk and so forth, let's say. And so as we get cleverer and cleverer, or as some of our distant galactic neighbors get cleverer and clever with better and better AI, they will build simulations of entire worlds. And therefore, and it's very likely they build billions of these simulations, and therefore it's very likely that the Earth is just a simulation. Now, we think that this argument is nonsense because we think that there is a quite strict mathematical limit to AI, what AI can do. And it would apply also on the planet Mogadon. It's a mathematical limit to what AI can do, and it can't do things like create. It can't create simple cells. It can't create simple proteins. It can't do anything which involves a complex system. And I think I can prove that I'm right in what I just said. So there is something called Fermi's paradox. Fermi's paradox goes like this. We are an intelligent planet, a planet with intelligence. There are many, many planets in the universe. And so statistically speaking, it's likely that there are many other intelligent planets in the universe. So that seems to be a reasonable inference. And also, because there are going to be so many other intelligent planets, some of them will become curious, as we are becoming curious, and want to explore other planets. So there are many, many intelligent planets, some of which will be incredibly clever and have fantastic technology. And some of them will have developed vehicles which can travel very quickly. And so some of them, by this argument, should be here on Earth, and we should have seen them already. That's Fermi's paradox. Why don't we see any UFOs? And we have an answer. The reason why we don't see any UFOs is because to create technologically, the apparatus which could travel through the universe and survive would involve really, really powerful AI. And really, really powerful AI is impossible. So I rest my case.
I had a quick question.
Great.
I'll try to make it as coherent as possible. So when we run the machine learning algorithm, and we don't only do one test, we do a couple of tests just to make sure that we're on the right path.
Yeah.
And obviously we do certain splits to avoid biases. So do you think that is not solving the problem? The problem still exists, that there is a bias, even if we try our best to eliminate it. So
was your question just about bias, or was it about
bias, precision, everything?
Yeah. So we don't know how ChatGPT exactly created its bias avoiding mechanism, but we already know that people have broken through it multiple times. It's not clear how we can avoid bias by using multiple large language models. I guess if we want to avoid bias, and if we have a way of detecting bias, we can just use multiple models and then just pick the one that we think is free of bias. But then it's the human being which is doing the work here. It's not the machine. It's not an intelligence step from the machine. It's an intelligence step from the human being. The fact that these things are black boxes means that we cannot ever be sure that they won't manifest bias, whatever we do.
Okay, thank you.
So I see that there are now 7 new messages, so we're doing well. Or maybe they're just great talk, thank you, which is nice anyway. Let me see if I can find where we are. So exactly. So building a digital twin is impossible for the same. A real digital twin of a complex system is impossible for all the reasons I've given. I guess there will be improved diagnostic accuracy. I think that's probably reasonable to assume, because some of the boring, repetitive work of the diagnostician will be done. That will give the diagnostician more time to do better work, I guess. Let's see what's next. Sorry, I'm not good at this. So we've done the conscious one. If we could see how it works, could we have an increase in confidence? We can't see how it works. That's the whole explainability problem. That's the black box. You can't see inside the black box. Can't create your own universe. Can you explain why the weights, the underlying polynomials function, don't correlate to what might be driving an output? So the weights in original neural networks were indeed assigned in just the way you're describing. But the modern ones are deep neural networks, which means that there are hidden layers which are not influenced by human output at all. They're influenced by very, very complicated AI processes, which I'm not a technical mathematical person enough to describe. So that it's really a black box, and it's a black box from the beginning of its life to the end. Can AI transmit? No. So some people worry about the singularity. That's what I started off about. So the singularity would mean that somehow an AI would take over banks, it would take over an army, it would take over an arms manufacturer, and it would make them all work towards killing human beings or killing anyone who tried to unplug them from the power core. It's nonsense that they could ever do that. And the idea that ChatGPT is a first step towards something like that is nonsense. It can't do anything without the assistance of human beings. So if the AI was transmitting interstellar signals, that would be because a human has set up a complicated telescope transmitter setup, and the human would control what kind of signals the AI would send or detect. And that's already almost certainly happening, actually. But humans are devising the way it happens, devising the machinery, building the machinery, ordering spare parts, and so on. It's all humans who are exercising their will. AI has no will. It can't want anything. And maybe it can design new matter. That's a thing where you create a design. AIs can create designs. And I do not rule out that they might not design new matter. But then they'd have to design also the way in which you synthesize that matter. It would still be matter. It would still be made of molecules, just the same molecules that we have already. But they would also have to design the processes which would lead to the synthesizing of that new matter. I don't think we have any example of that yet, but we have examples of designs for new matter. And now, so AI does not need to be perfection. I agree. It just needs to be able to complement human inadequacies and weaknesses. Insofar as we can do that sensibly, I agree. But we shouldn't assume always that we are complementing human inadequacies. We may, in some cases, without knowing it, even be making things worse. And if viewed from that perspective, large language models can be tremendously helpful. I agree with that. I am a fan of ChatGPT. I've just been emphasizing the dark side because that's what I find more interesting, to be honest. But because I think it's significant, given all the hype on the non-dark side. I mean, the hype is part of the dark side, but the hype is trying to point us to the bright side. So it may not pick up rare cases, but most physicians often misdiagnose those cases too. And this is a very good point, actually. Yes. So I complained that that we can only get good results from an AI system where we are raising issues with regard to those parts of the sample data set which are well populated, the Michael Jackson parts. The rare diseases are by definition not going to be well populated, and so they're going to be a problem equally for both humans and physicians. And I am confident that AI can help. In fact, I know that it already is helping to create a situation where humans will have better tools to deal with rare diseases. And so I have not emphasized this, and I apologize, but there are already ways in which AI is solving precisely this kind of problem. And if you're interested, you can email me about that too. And so should we start? No, we should not start to petition the legislative branches. The goal, the drive is coming from OpenAI and those big companies, Facebook and so on. They want it to be legislatively controlled so that they can keep out the open source tinkerers who are building software that can do what their software does, but offer it for free. They want to keep their profits. It's like the FDA. The FDA is there in part to help pharma companies keep their profits. I probably ought to delete that from the recording, but I use that just as a simplification. We do not want AI to be legislated. AI is just a tool. It will help in some ways, but it's not going to take over the world. There are no dangers. Now, I'll take that back too. There are dangers if it's used by criminals, for instance, or if it's used by bad people to do bad things. But it's the humans then that need to be put under control. You can't stop guns being used for bad purposes. That doesn't mean, well, I probably should stop this sentence too. So prevent the total automation of jobs. So the person questioning here, actually, I disagree. I think that if people can be replaced by machines for doing completely routine jobs, that can only be a good thing. And ChatGPT already has generated just as many jobs as it has eliminated. And that the jobs that it's created are more interesting ones than the jobs that it's eliminated. And this has happened in all phases of human industrial progress, that the number of new jobs, sooner or later, in this case, it's happening very quickly, is increasing to keep pace with the number of jobs which are being lost because of the new technology. 3 new messages. So, isn't this American system hard at work? I'm not sure which American system you mean, so maybe you can enter your question again. What does the evolution look like 20 years from now? If we automate everything, our system wouldn't react to it. So I think if we automate everything, we would be making a mistake also. I think that it's good that there are people who are doing things using old technology, old materials, old recipes, old plants, old foodstuffs, and so on. It's good that we have backup. We shouldn't try and turn everything into some kind of factory. That would be horrible. So there are some nice responses. Thank you, Skylar. Does that mean you want to switch me off?
No. Talk as long as you have time for. I think everyone's enjoying it. There's a lot of people still here.
I certainly want to answer all the questions which have been raised.
Yeah, I'm glad.
I'm finding it hard to. So I will ask a selfish question while I'm trying to navigate. I have a horrible croaking problem with my throat just at the moment. Is this making the talk really uncomfortable to listen to? Be honest.
Not at all. I didn't even notice that unless
okay. I can feel it in my throat.
Perfect. Good.
All right. So what does the evolution look like 20 years from now? I did that one. Then we have Skylar. I will read Executive Order 13859. I'll just add that to my slides. And that's it. We're done. So I will thank you all very much. And I will write my email here just in case anyone wants the slides or for any other reason.
Yeah, and I do want to take a second to thank you again. That was a very interesting, engaging talk. We got lots of people asking questions, so it was great to have you as part of the boot camp for sure. I enjoyed it, and I definitely think others did too.
Very good. So thank you all very much. I enjoyed it, and there were good questions there, and you even caught me out on several questions. So I'll do better next time.
Did anyone else have any other questions?
Okay. So bye-bye.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to because we started this a little early, I'm gonna try to clip the beginning of this so that the recording doesn't have a bunch of dead space, but I'll get this uploaded as soon as possible. And if anybody wants to watch it again.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And nice to meet you all. Bye-bye.
Oh, okay, I think I'll go ahead and end this now. Have a good day, guys.